Now what I want to do is I want to pull this clip up from another news channel that I found very interesting because they're going to draw some parallels in between Hunter Biden's case and Trump's case. And I wanted to speak on that for a moment because Hunter Biden's case really highlights how much of a farce the Trump case was. It really highlights how much of a farce that was when you go into Hunter Biden's case and everything that surrounds it. So let's get into this clip right now.
Filled out the same form.
Rewind it back just a little bit.
Hunter Biden filled out the same form that everybody fills out when purchasing a firearm, and it requires you to basically tell the government, I'm not suffering from an addiction. I'm not using illegal drugs. I don't have an issue that should prevent me from owning a firearm. But it's a self-evaluation. You get to decide what truth you're going to put down on that form, and the defense's argument looks to be formed as at the time he signed that document, he wasn't using drugs. If he was using drugs, he wasn't addicted to drugs. And like Daryl just mentioned, addiction is oftentimes thought of as a lifetime condition. Once an addict, there are arguments that you are always an addict. And that obviously would conflict with the idea of being able to own a firearm, use your Second Amendment rights. This issue of drug use, self-disclosure in the acquisition of firearms isn't new. It's just extraordinarily rarely prosecuted. And I feel the defense is going to lean into that. This is a allegedly political prosecution where the only reason Hunter Biden is being targeted by the federal government is due to the relations with his father.
On that same note, what would be the best defense of Hunter Biden, in your opinion?
It's the same defense that I wish they had used to defend former President Trump, which is the only reason, ladies and gentlemen, that we are here in this court. The only reason the government has gathered us together is for a purely political motive and operation, and that is the specific selection of this defendant to prosecute a crime that can occur thousands and thousands of other times but is never prosecuted. Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm going to rewind that again concerning Hunter Biden's trial, right? And his crime that he committed.
Purely political motive and operation, and that is the specific selection of this defendant to prosecute a crime that can occur thousands and thousands of other times but is never prosecuted. Ladies and gentlemen, if you feel that that's the way our system should work, I beg you to convict my client. Beg you. But I don't believe in that kind of America. The America that I believe in, we treat everybody the same and everybody fairly. And that's why this prosecution is wrong, and you should acquit my client, Mr. Biden.
Now, what he was saying is interesting, right? Because concerning the charges that Hunter Biden has against him, like you said, any other person, and just in general, people in general, right? You can commit this crime like 100 times over and you'd never get prosecuted for it. Because the only reason you'd be getting prosecuted for this crime is if you actually committed a crime and harmed someone with the firearm. If there was a greater crime committed in which he harmed someone with the firearm, whether he actually shot someone or maybe he just robbed them, but if a greater crime was committed, that's when this would come into play. The charges that he has now would come into play, because in a kind of a theoretical sense, right, or hypothetical scenario, let's say Hunter actually robbed somebody, right? I won't say he powed somebody, but we'll just say he robbed somebody. Hunter robbed somebody. He gets caught robbing somebody. So he violated someone with the gun. He committed a crime with the gun. Now they take the gun in for processing as evidence. Obviously, they're going to check to see if the gun is legal and registered in his name. Yes, it's legal and registered in his name. But as they see it's legal and registered in his name, and they go through the form, the application form, and he checked off the fact that I'm not a drug user, I'm not on drugs, I'm not an addict, but there's clear evidence that you were. It's at that point that you would get hit with these additional charges, right, of falsifying documents. Oh, you see how that works? Falsifying your application right? Saying that you're not on drugs when you were on drugs, right? If the greater crime doesn't happen, you never get prosecuted for lying on the application because there's no way to know that you lied on the application unless you actually committed a crime with the gun for them to now retroactively go back to make sure that the firearm that you use is on the up and up, to which they find out, yeah, you did own it, you did buy it legally and all that, but there's evidence that shows that you were on drugs and using when you purchased it and you lied on the form, and all of that is illegal. You weren't supposed to have it in to begin with. That's a charge because you're a user with a firearm, but on top of that, you lied on your form. You falsified your documents, right? And that's very interesting how it's so parallel to the Trump case. Let's get into this very quickly.
The Hunter Biden trial is unfolding after Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies in New York City. Emily, can I, first of all, so much is happening over in America. Can I get your reaction to that outcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was entirely predictable. It was a jury in Manhattan, so the likelihood that he was going to be convicted, I would have put money on it. I didn't, but if I would have been right, because it just it seemed like, there was also even just some of the evidence that was allowed in. This judge, by the way, actually donated a small amount of money to Democrats, which was a strange thing for a judge to do. It just looked like it was never going in Trump's favor, even though the legal questions about the underlying nature of the prosecution, I think, are extremely serious. That you have the statute of limitations passing, so a prosecutor who ran on a partisan ticket then trumps up the charges, no pun intended, actually, to be felonies when they would typically be misdemeanors because they're in the service or in the furtherance of a separate crime. But Donald Trump was not charged with that underlying crime.
Rewind this one more time. Please listen to what she's saying.
Questions about the underlying nature of the prosecution, I think, are extremely serious. That you have the statute of limitations passing, so a prosecutor who ran on a partisan ticket then trumps up the charges, no pun intended, actually, to be felonies when they would typically be misdemeanors because they're in the service or in the furtherance of a separate crime. But Donald Trump was not charged with that underlying crime, which is a very, very strange thing to do. Even MSNBC was calling this a novel legal theory. Questions were raised in the New York Times about the wisdom of this novel legal theory. So it just, in court, though, seemed as though what had gone through the legal process, what had actually gotten to the jury, was going to go against Trump.
So what she's telling you is that the Trump trial was complete BS. Some can argue that the Hunter Biden case is BS. The big difference between Hunter Biden and Trump, which we're going to get into a little bit more, is that Hunter told on himself so much by way of his memoirs and just his escapades with hot girl Zoe, and then, you being with your deceased brother's wife and whatnot, and the laptop being out there with all these pictures. You told on yourself so egregiously that it's like, how can we not bring charges against you? Because you self-snitched so egregiously, just sloppy. Left your laptop at the computer store with all this stuff on it, all this incriminating evidence on it, right? On top of everything else. Whereas with Trump, that we're going to get into, and if you were paying attention to what she's saying, the falsifying of documents, that initially is just a misdemeanor. It's a slap on the wrist. You pay a fine and you go in on about your business. It only becomes a felony if it's in connection to a greater crime, meaning you falsified these documents to commit said greater crime. But as she was stating, he was never charged for a greater crime. He was only charged for falsifying documents. Now, I want to go to the Wikipedia page really quick, and let's read this in closing. Let's read this in closing. Let me pull this up for you guys right now concerning the Trump trial, right? Because I find this really interesting. So now this reads as such, and this is like the Trump hush money trial Wikipedia page. The people of the state of New York versus Donald Trump is a criminal case against Donald Trump, the 45th president of the United States, Trump was charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to conceal payments made to an adult film actress, Stormy Daniels, to ensure her silence about a sexual encounter between them, with costs related to the transaction included. The payments totaled $420,000. Now, the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, accused Trump, this is crazy, accused Trump of falsifying these business records with the intent to commit other crimes, violation of federal campaign finance limits, unlawfully influencing the 2016 US presidential election, and tax fraud. Understand, they elevated a misdemeanor crime to a felony crime because they said, well, even though you didn't commit the greater crime that would then make the falsifying documents crime a felony, there was intent to do it. But how can I intend to do something that you didn't charge me for because I didn't do it? And on top of that, the time has already passed. We're in 2024, and you're talking about something that I did allegedly in 2016, 2017. So did I intend to hop in a time machine and go back in time to commit those crimes? You follow what I'm saying? How? That's completely and utterly ridiculous. I had to have committed the greater crime in order for you to elevate my falsifying documents to a felony charge. But I didn't do it. Henceforth, I wasn't charged with those crimes, but you elevated a misdemeanor charge to a felony anyways, saying that the intent was there to do it. But how can I intend to do something that I didn't do? And now we're past that time period, but you're saying that's what you were going to do, but I didn't do it. That's why I wasn't charged, but you were going to do it. So we're going to elevate this to a felony charge anyways. That's completely backwards. Once again, the only logic there at that point now is that what Bragg is telling me is that he believes that Trump was somehow going to go back in time. He was going to get into a time machine. He was going to go back in time to commit those crimes because the original intent of falsifying documents were to commit said crimes that he never committed. It's completely upside down and ridiculous. So you see the parallels between Trump's trial and Biden's trial. They're very similar. They're very similar in many regards, because essentially for both of them, in any normal setting, for both of them to have gone to trial for this, they would have both had to commit a greater crime. Neither one of them committed the greater crime, but they both ended up going to court, for charges that anybody else would not have went to court for. The only difference between the two being is that, like I stated earlier, Hunter Biden was so reckless and told on himself so egregiously that you sit back and go, okay, how can you not be charged? How can you not be charged? And originally he wasn't charged, but a Trump nominated judge in Delaware is the one who beat the drums to get those charges put on him, right? Because once again, the evidence against him was so egregious. It's like, come on, man. Like we know what you did. So how can we not charge you? We're just going to not charge you because you're Biden's son? I don't think so. And now here we are.